When three Venezuelan patrol vessels dared to challenge the might of the U.S. Navy in the pre-dawn darkness of the Caribbean, they were about to learn a lesson in naval dominance they would never forget. At approximately 4:17 local time, three fast-moving Venezuelan patrol vessels surged out of the dark Caribbean horizon and sliced across the bow of the U.S. carrier strike group at roughly 28 knots, their formation cutting directly into the course of the American fleet and forming what appeared to be a menacing water barrier aimed at forcing the group to stop, turn, or back off. Moments later, on board the USS George Washington, a collision alarm sounded as the radar screens lit up and the distance closed to under 12 nautical miles, a clear sign the interception was deliberate, not accidental, with Venezuela effectively declaring a stretch of international waters as its own security zone and daring the U.S. Navy to react. Yet instead of veering away, the American carrier group held course with an unmistakable message that navigation freedoms would not be compromised, and what unfolded over the next few minutes would test tactics, resolve, and maritime signal sending at the highest level. But by choosing to confront the U.S. Navy, Venezuela had made a critical miscalculation, and they discovered far too quickly that they were challenging the wrong opponent. At 4:19, the three Venezuelan patrol vessels advanced in a tight V-shaped formation, with their wakes slicing clean lines across the Caribbean surface as they pushed past 28 knots, and instead of shadowing from a distance, they angled themselves directly into the projected route of the U.S. carrier strike group, moving with the precision of a unit that had rehearsed the maneuver more than once, with each shift of their bow inching them closer to the corridor the USS George Washington would naturally pass through, weaving into the American path in a way that looked like a test, a signal, and a trap all at once. As the distance shrank, the U.S. carrier's bridge detected the abnormal approach as radar operators called out the tightening triangle on their screens, and within seconds, the collision alarm echoed through the steel halls while sailors hurried to their stations, fastening gear, checking communications, and preparing for whatever the next minutes might bring. Because although carrier groups are designed to handle pressure, an interception inside 12 nautical miles is never dismissed as routine, since for large vessels, this range is the psychological and tactical threshold where reaction time drops dramatically, and a ship the size of a carrier cannot turn sharply or accelerate away, meaning any hostile vessel breaching this distance can force a confrontation simply through positioning, which is why the bridge treated the fast-closing formation with such gravity. Despite the early hour, tension built quickly as the Venezuelan vessels maintained perfect alignment, with their bows pointed not toward open water, but toward the predicted movement of the carrier itself. And it became clear they were not drifting, observing, or patrolling, but were locking into what naval analysts often describe as an attack geometry, and a calculated angle where one turn or acceleration could cut across another ship's bow. And what made the moment even more striking was the lack of any slowdown from the intercepting formation, as their momentum held steady and their navigation lights remained bright and assertive, showing they were not hiding their presence but amplifying it. On the American bridge, the watch officer monitored every bearing change as the carrier's escorts tightened their own formation, and although no weapons were armed, the readiness posture shifted silently and unmistakably as movements around the deck grew sharper and orders traveled faster, with everyone understanding that whatever Venezuela intended, it was unfolding now. And as the gap narrowed further, a realization spread through the carrier's command deck that this was not surveillance and not a miscalculated patrol route, but rather the Venezuelan vessels were placing themselves in a direct intercept position, creating a line they clearly did not expect the United States to cross, because they were not testing equipment, but testing resolve. And in those final seconds of the approach, the push toward direct confrontation became undeniable, since the pattern was too exact, the angle too committed, and the timing too deliberate for chance, revealing a maneuver designed to provoke a decision at the highest stakes. At the moment the Venezuelan formation locked into its forward angle, the U.S. Navy answered with a move that was as calm as it was calculated, as the USS Gravely, positioned on the carrier's starboard side, pushed its turbines harder and began sliding into a new trajectory, with the destroyer tilting its bow toward the intercept line and drifting starboard in a deliberate arc that placed it directly between the fast-moving patrol craft and the USS George Washington. Because out on open water, speed is only part of the contest, and what truly matters is positioning, since the ship that claims the decisive angle first controls how the entire confrontation unfolds, which is why the Gravely's maneuver felt cold, sharp, and unnervingly precise, as it did not swerve or lurch, but instead cut across the sea with the confidence of a vessel that understood every meter of the battle space.
Up on deck, the next signal rose into the wind as an MH-60R Seahawk spun its rotors to life, with the piercing horror growing louder and echoing across the carrier group as the helicopter lifted from its pad and swung into orbit above the destroyer, its flight path forming a protective ring that could be seen from miles away and demonstrating a common U.S. Navy tactic used in tense encounters, because Naval Air Systems Command has frequently noted in its public releases that Seahawk units provide early visual deterrence during close approaches, offering both surveillance and overwatch without escalating to force, which is why the aircraft hovered at a controlled distance, creating a visible reminder that the strike group was fully aware of every angle the Venezuelan ships were attempting to exploit. Below, the Gravely's bridge team monitored the intercept line with steadiness, as the destroyer was now acting as a soft barrier, a tool the Navy often uses to expose an approaching vessel's true intention, because by occupying the contested path at a sharper angle, the Gravely forced the Venezuelan ships to choose either to adjust their heading, reveal an escalation, or risk a dangerous crossing situation. And analysts describing similar episodes, such as those documented by the U.S. Naval Institute in 2022, have emphasized that these soft block maneuvers allow the Navy to increase tactical clarity without initiating confrontation, with the idea being simple, that when the United States places a destroyer in your direct line of travel, your next move says everything. For a brief moment, observers could have expected the Venezuelan formation to slow down, widen their spacing, or alter course. But none of that happened, as instead the three patrol ships held their speed, maintaining a stubborn, almost defiant momentum as they closed the distance, with their wakes stretching in long streaks behind them, showing no hesitation and no sign of retreat. And this refusal to yield added a new layer of tension to the scene, because it meant the Gravely's presence was not enough to change their plan. From the air, the Seahawks circled and captured each shift and angle, transmitting clear footage back to the destroyer, while from the sea the Gravely kept advancing, steady as a blade. And as the formation tightened, one truth became impossible to ignore, that Venezuela was not simply testing the carrier group's radar or discipline, because the refusal to drop below high-speed approach suggested a deeper play, a bid to pressure the U.S. Navy into diverting its course. Yet the American response remained unwavering, because by holding its position and controlling the intercept line, the Gravely was quietly making a statement that required no broadcast, no warning, and no raised weapon. Because the sea may be wide, but the first ship to secure the critical angle dictates who bends and who holds firm. And in this confrontation, Venezuela had pushed forward with confidence, but the U.S. Navy had already shaped the outcome without firing a single shot. The next phase of the confrontation unfolded slowly at first, almost quietly, but every movement carried weight, as the Venezuelan patrol vessels continued closing the gap, and the USS Gravely shifted its posture in a way that every sailor on deck understood immediately, with the destroyer's 5-inch Mark 45 gun, normally kept pointed forward in a neutral position, beginning to rotate, not swinging fast nor locking onto any target, but instead easing toward the direction of the three approaching ships and stopping at an angle that made one thing unmistakable, that the United States had entered a state of readiness. Because naval photographers have documented similar moments in past close encounters, such as those reported by Naval News in 2023, where a destroyer adjusted its main gun angle during a tense standoff in the South China Sea to signal preparedness without escalating to a firing posture. And this gesture is subtle, but every nation with a navy recognizes it instantly. Around the Gravely, other weapon systems shifted in their own quiet ways, as the close-in weapon system, dormant a few minutes ago, began tracking in passive mode, with its sensors humming only internally, and the radars embedded within its white dome scanning the horizon without emitting the aggressive signatures associated with a full targeting cycle. And simultaneously, the ship's Spy-1 radar, the heart of the Aegis combat system, maintained its wide-area picture in a listening stance, because although Spy-1 is capable of illuminating targets with extraordinary strength, the crew kept it in a non-threatening configuration, collecting raw data while avoiding any move that Venezuela could misinterpret as an intent to fire. Above the destroyer, the MH-60R Seahawk drew a wide orbit, carving long arcs in the blue backdrop, and against the blue backdrop, its silhouette resembled a floating sentry, the kind of airborne guardian that keeps watch long before conflict breaks out. Because the U.S. Navy has highlighted the role of Seahawk patrols in several public briefings, including one released by the Naval Air Systems Command in 2022, describing how helicopters provide early detection and de-escalation by simply being visible overhead. And from its vantage point, the helicopter observed the Venezuelan formation tightening again, while sending continuous imagery back to the ship below. Out on open sea, visibility can be as powerful as firepower, as the United States has relied on what analysts often call deterrence by visibility, a strategy where showing readiness is more effective than actually using force. And history supports this approach because the Congressional Research Service noted in a 2021 report on maritime security that demonstrating posture during high-tension encounters often prevents escalation by forcing the opposing side to reconsider the consequences of pushing forward. And this strategy works because every nation understands the rules of the sea, and every navy knows that when a destroyer displays its weapons even lightly, the next steps must be chosen with caution. For the Gravely, this display was deliberate, as the destroyer revealed its capabilities but held back its aggression, showing that the United States was fully prepared while still giving Venezuela every opportunity to disengage. And from the carrier's bridge, sailors watched the unfolding choreography of the circling helicopter, the angled main gun, and the hum of passive sensors, with none of it being reckless, but all of it controlled, professional, and unmistakably firm. Yet despite the warnings written across every movement of the American formation, the Venezuelan ships continued forward as their bows put deeper into the sea and the range closed to 4 nautical miles, a distance that for military vessels is uncomfortably tight because at that point, every shift of water, every change